channel. My name is Débora, I'm a Brazilian history teacher, and today I'm here to teach you everything about the history of my country, Brazilian history. You will come out of this video as an expert of Brazilian culture and history. As you may have seen, this video is kind of long, but keep up with me, bear with me, because I promise you will not be bored for a single second during this video. I'm very sassy, and I will teach you Brazilian history as if we were chatting, making some tea, making some gossip, and talking about people that we know. But it's actually dead people from the 16th century. So let's start with the most important disclaimer. My accent. Let's talk about it. So I started studying English as I was a child. I have a very good level of English, but obviously some things cannot be raised, and I have a very thick accent. I'm sorry about that. If it is difficult for you to understand what I'm saying, don't worry. This video has captions on it, and these captions are made by an actual human being that is my friend, that is an English teacher. So if I make a mistake, the captions will be right. So if you cannot understand what I say, put on the caption and deal with it, because accents are a thing. And yeah, I speak 5 languages. Give me a break. Please give me a break. It's madness in here. Second disclaimer is that as this video is very long, I will also make a shorter version. If you don't have much time, you can watch the shorter version. But I promise you, the long one will also make you very happy and wise and clever, and you will like it very much. And the third disclosure is that I don't know how this video found you, but I'm very glad that it did. This video is focused on foreign people. If you have any interest about Brazilian culture, if you know someone that is Brazilian and want to understand more a little bit about these people's culture, about their lives, and if you want more people to understand our culture, if you want to support my job, please share this video. And if you're Brazilian, please compartilha esse vídeo com algum estrangeiro que você conhece, para ele aprender um pouco mais sobre a nossa história e a nossa cultura. Brasil! Okay, so let's start speaking a little bit more about me. Why am I teaching you this? My name is Débora. I am 26 years old. I have a college degree on history, Brazilian history and world history. So I'm a history teacher for high school level, and teaching is not only my job, but it's my passion and my life purpose. So I have this channel for more than 10 years. I started as a teenager, and I love what I do. I love talking about history. I love talking about the history of my country, and I also love languages. I speak 5 languages fluently. I speak Portuguese, obviously my native language, English, Spanish, Italian, and French. I like the Latin languages, as you can see. And I always lived in Brazil my whole life. I never lived elsewhere. I have had relatives that were Italian that came to Brazil in the 19th century because Italy was passing through a rough time, and my mom had some relatives that were Lebanese, so this is why the Arabic features come in. And that's it. If you want to continue keeping up with me and my work, you can subscribe to my channel. My videos are in Portuguese, but you can turn on the translate of the subtitles, so you can kind of read what I'm speaking. And I also have an Instagram and a TikTok account where I post short videos where I try to teach history in a more fun and entertaining way. So I hope you like it. Enough of me, let's speak about Brazil. So, as you may know, the country where I am is Brazil. We speak it differently. With the Brazilian accent, we speak Brasil. Repeat after me, Brasil. If you want to speak like us, nice, but we don't mind your accent. But the thing we do mind, how to win extra points with any Brazilian. Write Brazil with an S. We write Brazil with an S. So if you write Brazil as we write Brazil, you win extra aura points with us, okay? And what language do Brazilian people speak? Brazilians speak Portuguese, okay? Because we were colonized by Portugal, and we do not speak Spanish, okay? It's kind of offensive when people think that we speak Spanish only because we're close to Spanish-speaking countries. And Brazil is also a Latin America country. I know, especially for USA people, they have a little bit of difficulty understanding this, but Latin America is kind of everything under the US. But if you ever listen to Portuguese people speaking, you will realize that Portugal and Brazil have different accents, and this difference comes because Brazil had a lot of influence of African and indigenous languages. So we speak a lot of indigenous words on our daily basis, and we also speak a lot of African words because we had millions and millions of African people that came to Brazil. And when you capture someone to become a slave, you don't give them a Portuguese course. So these people were mixing Portuguese and their native languages all the time, and throughout the centuries it became a single language. So now let's begin Brazilian History 101. Our journey begins way before than the 1500s. That was when European people found out that the American continent was a thing. Because Brazil was already home for more than 5 million indigenous people, 5 million native Brazilians that lived here. They were divided in more than 1,200 different tribes, and more than 1,400 different languages were spoken here in Brazil. So even though they were not a unified population, they had a lot of similarities. And as we had more than 1,000 different tribes, I cannot speak individually about each one of them. I will speak about some facts that the majority of the populations shared. And those native populations had very interesting characteristics. For example, they formed egalitarian societies. They were pretty much decentralized. They saw themselves as being a part of the nature, in contrary, for example, as the Christian mentality that God gave people the earth to profit from it, to use it, to thrive with it. They lived in collective housings, and they saw the task of educating children and the further generations as a collective task, as a collective job. So they were pretty much a unified community within their own tribes. And a lot of Brazilian cuisine comes from this population. So foods that for us are part of our daily basis, like the manioc, the corn, fish, fruit, and everything that we eat on a daily basis. And they were very hygienic. I don't know if you ever lived with a Brazilian person, but we are very obsessive about being clean all the time. So the indigenous populations have this thing which impressed very much the Portuguese, because in Europe they didn't have such a culture. And here, not only because of those cultural things, but also because we are in a tropical country, they had, and we continue having, this thing of showering all the time. This is still a part of our Brazilian culture. And if you want to see by yourself, even though the Portuguese kind of genocided the indigenous population in Brazil, we still have more than 1.5 million indigenous people that live in Brazil. So if you come to Brazil, you can for sure go to an indigenous community and see a little bit how they work, how they live. They are very welcoming to tourism, and they like to show their culture, they like to show their way of life. It's a very rich activity. If you ever come to Brazil, I highly recommend you to do so. The majority of them are northern Brazil, within or nearby the Amazon rainforest, but they are everywhere as well. And speaking of the devil, how did this genocide happen? How did our indigenous population come from 5 million people in the 1500s to less than 2 million? And keep in mind, nowadays that we have actual laws to protect the indigenous populations and communities, the indigenous population in Brazil grew higher, because decades ago it was less than 1 million people. So how did the Portuguese annihilate more than 4 million indigenous communities throughout the years? Okay, so the Europeans had 3 main tools to eliminate those populations, that were weapons, diseases, and religion. Yes, I'm talking about them, the Catholics. Okay, so first, obviously, guns. Indigenous people had their own guns, but not fire weapons. So in the moment the Europeans arrived with literally gunpowder, cannons, and firearms, yeah, it was kind of an unfair fight. Yeah, so a lot of people died this way. Also, the Portuguese came with a lot of diseases that we were not prepared to deal with, that we did not have the immune system to deal with. Keep in mind, it was 500 years ago, so vaccines, medications, not a thing. And also sexual diseases, yes, the STDs, yeah, they were also a thing, because a lot of indigenous women were I will not finish saying this. Yes, this also happened. So yes, STDs were also a very common killer for indigenous populations. And the miscegenation, the cultural exchange that we had in this time was very much forced, because it's complicated. Okay, so other than the weapons and diseases, Portuguese people also exterminated indigenous culture and indigenous people using religion. We have to remember that at the time, in the 16th century, there was this guy called Luther. in Germany that was causing a little bit of chaos because he was making a Protestant church. So the Catholics, they made the counter-reform, which consists in fighting back against Luther by making new Catholics. And when they found out a huge continent with 0 Catholics, they were like, oh my God, how many potential Catholics do we have? So they sent a lot of priests, a lot of missionaries to Brazil, and they were spreading their religion. So cultural violence was a thing here because Portugal not only conquered us, but literally prohibited by law that all the indigenous spoke their own languages, and also prohibited the indigenous people to have their own religions. They had to convert to Catholicism, and also demonized their culture. So literally saying that their rituals, the fact that they used few clothing, that the way that they lived was demoniac, that was heretic. So even though Brazil, the own name of the country, comes from an indigenous word, which means red as amber, more than 1,000 native idioms were completely lost due to this cultural violence that the indigenous population suffered. And from the more than 1,200 languages that were spoken in Brazil when white people came here, we have remaining 270. And obviously, to this day, we still struggle to keep them because a lot of the speakers are dying. We need more linguists to write it up and to document it. And to this day, our native population is very much threatened because people nowadays want their land. And it's very important to say that from the moment the first Portuguese, the first European person stepped the foot in Brazil, indigenous people started to be enslaved, okay? We will speak a little bit about slavery later. And later, the indigenous slavery was traded by African slavery, also because Portugal earned a lot. And when I say a lot, it is a lot of money from people trading. Yeah, because if people trafficking is still a very lucrative business to this day, which is illegal, imagine how lucrative it was when it was legalized. So Brazil always existed, but it was found by European people in the year of 1500, okay? When Pedro Álvares Cabral, Peter, he arrived here in Brazil and he was like, oh my God, that is so nice. I want it. Obviously, it was not easy. Obviously, the indigenous populations fought back, but as I explained to you, they had very little chance, even though they literally fought to death. And Portugal and Spain did a lot of treaties to divide this continent that they had newly conquered, okay? So, in the beginning, Brazil was seen by Portugal as a side hustle. That is because Portugal at the time was earning a lot of money from spices, commerce, and with their trades that they were doing in the Orient. So at the time, Portugal was having a lot of commercial trades with India, spices, sugar, especially because different from Spain, that from the first moment that they arrived in South America, they already found a lot of silver, gold mines, and a lot of wealth in their colonies. The Portuguese did not. The first gold mine found in Brazil was only in 1692. So it took them a lot of time to find out richness, wealth here. So Brazil was not so important for Portugal until it was important for someone else, which is the Dutch and the French. So I am for very little, and when I say very little, is actually very little. For very little, I'm not here speaking to you in French or in Dutch, because for very little, Brazil was not a Dutch colony and later a French colony. The French literally populated Brazil. They already conquered Rio de Janeiro. Yes, they did. France made 2 kingdoms here in Brazil. Literally, there is a state called Maranhão, whose capital is called São Luís in an homage to Saint Louis, the king of France. So they literally made cities in the name of the king of France. And also the Dutch occupied a huge part of Brazil for decades. They had to do war, and the Portuguese had to literally align with the indigenous to expel the Dutch, while the French also aligned with indigenous people, because France realized that Portugal was mistreating the natives. So they were like, hello, if I am your owner and not Portugal, I will treat you nice. And the indigenous were like, okay, I don't like either of you, but you're less worse, I guess. So yeah, wars happened in this sense. So if you are Dutch, you should definitely go to a very important state and beautiful, beautiful place, believe me, called Pernambuco, which capital is Recife, you will see a lot of streets with Dutch names. You will see a lot of monuments made by Dutch people. You will see Brazil's first synagogue, because at the time people escaping from religious persecution came to Brazil. So yeah, if you're Dutch, if you're Jewish, you should for sure go to Recife and see the first ever synagogue. And if you are French, you should definitely go to São Luís to see the city made in honor of your ex-former king. So Portugal was not minding Brazil's business until the French came in. So Portugal realized, okay, even though they're not the most lucrative, I have to do some kind of administration, otherwise my land will be stolen. So at this time, Portugal had, they tried a lot of different ways to administrate Brazil. They literally made up some lines, some borders, and gave up the administration for Portuguese people, but it didn't work out. And now let's talk a little bit about economics, because Brazil had a lot of products that created a lot of wealth, but of course for other people. Or do you think the colonies got their own wealth? Of course not. To this day, I will explain it to you. The main products that Brazil exported were, first, the first one which brought the name to the country was pau-brasil, Brazil wood, which is a tree that grows in the woods. It's a very big tree, it's a very fat branch, and if you cut it, it is red inside. So this is where the word comes from. Brasil is a Tupi word, is an indigenous word that means red as ember. And pau-brasil, Brazil wood, was very precious because it was not only good quality wood, but the fact that it was red in the inside made a high quality paint that was used especially for fabrics and clothing and everything. We were also very big producers of sugar that was highly valuable in Europe, rubber, cotton, and coffee, which to this day is a very big product that is made in Brazil. And of course, one thing that Brazil provided a lot for European countries was gold. Now, history gets a little bit personal for me because I didn't speak it in the beginning of the video, but I live in a city that is called Belo Horizonte, which literally means beautiful horizon. But the name of my state is called Minas Gerais, which means general mines, because it was in my state that for the first time in 1692 gold was found in Brazil. This gets a little bit personal because Brazil always was, and unfortunately I don't think it will ever stop to be, a slave from its own wealth, because my state was formed due to mining, and to this day we are completely sold to mining companies. And as many other small towns in my state, mining is what keeps us going, but is also what kills us, and kills us very slowly. It pollutes a lot, it destroys nature, destroys full mountains. So what happened was, from the moment Portuguese step up their foot here, they were thinking, it is impossible that the Spanish found gold and silver so close to Brazil and Brazil doesn't have mines. It is impossible. And they were actually right, because it took them a couple of centuries, but they did found gold. And the first gold that was found was literally in the rivers, and it could be picked by hand. So the word spread that there was a place in Brazil where you could go with any material, with any employee, and with your bare hands you could pick up gold, go back to Portugal and make yourself a fortune. So literally, guys, in less than 100 years, the population of my state grew from 300,000 people to 3 million. In the 18th century, Portugal literally had to make laws to stop Portuguese people from fleeing away to Brazil. Obviously, we don't have exact numbers, but the estimative is that throughout the gold rush that we had in Brazil, more than 800,000 kilos or 1,700,000 pounds of gold was taken from Brazil. And obviously, at the time, the worth of gold was different. If you want to have an estimation, in the day that I'm recording this video, the value of a kilo of gold is $92,000. The Portuguese stole because it's ours, because it grew in our lands, because they literally enslaved us and tied us and murdered us in exchange for this gold. If you want to convert to 2025 values, the Portuguese stole from us the equivalent of $73 billion or 70 billion euro. And I'm telling you that this is a very emotional thing for me because I was born and raised in this region, and we had a very, very aggressive slavery here because obviously as a lot of money was at stake, a lot of slave people were brought here. The slave trade became very higher in this time because they wanted and needed a lot of workforce to get inside the mines. The life estimation of a slave people that worked in mining was less than 25 years old. The enslaved people that work with mining had literally gags like dogs, so they wouldn't swallow gold, so they wouldn't hide gold to buy their own freedom. I come from a very small city which lives only by mining. Like more than half of the population are miners. It's a very simple city, it's a very beautiful city, but literally the streets of my hometown, which is called Congonhas, were built by slaves because it was a mining city. And to this day, mines, when you have to mine a place, it creates a lot of residue, it creates a lot of mud, and you have to make dams to contain it. So we had more than one. We had a couple of incidents where these dams exploded and killed hundreds of people, literally drowned in mud. They literally had to take trucks to take off the mud, dump it, and see if they found body parts. And the reason that I'm saying you this is because my hometown has the biggest dam in all the state. If the dam that is in my city explodes, like already happened twice with neighbor cities, it will not be hundreds of people dying buried in mud. It will be thousands. And it's a very sensible subject because our city lives with the money from mining, so we are all dependent on it, but at the same time we are all doomed by it. Literally, the neighborhood where my mom was born, people that lived there were called pigeon feet because there was so much dust from mining on the floor that if you walk there, your feet got red like pigeon feet. We are literally enslaved by our own wealth because we could not enjoy this because Portugal took literally $73 billion worth of gold and still managed to go bankrupt. Because if you know Portugal nowadays, you will realize, oh my God, Portugal is a small country with a small population and they managed to become poor. How did they do this? Well, there is a couple of reasons that led to that. First, Portugal badly administrated the money that they got because gold, iron, silver, everything that comes from nature, it's not infinite. It ends. If we destroy everything, we don't have nothing more. So the amount of gold here in Minas Gerais, in general mines, quickly shrinked. It got way more difficult and expensive to exploit gold, and Portugal thought that the gold would never end. So they wasted a lot of gold building magnificent churches. So if you go to Portugal, if you go to Lisbon, if you go even to a lot of cities in Brazil, we have churches completely made of gold, from walls to ceiling to chandeliers, everything made from gold. Portugal also badly administrated the money that they got because they had a lot of debt, public expenses to fulfill, and Portugal, as a lot of other countries and as Brazil became, Portugal was very, 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 very in debt with England. There are a lot of historians that argument that a part of the Industrial Revolution that happened in England in 1760 was founded by Minas Gerais gold because Portugal owned them a lot. So even though Portugal stole a lot of money, they still managed to go bankrupt. So this is where these memes come from because they ended up being worse than us in some ways. And also keep in mind, guys, that at this time England was having its imperialism, and in the peak of England's imperialism, they had control, direct or indirectly, in over 1/3 of the whole planet Earth. Okay, as you may know, Brazil had slavery. So slavery starts from the moment the first European steps foot in this beautiful country, okay? Because they started enslaving the indigenous, the natives, to pick up pau-brasil, Brazil wood, and then to make sugar, and then everything everything, but soon they traded native slavery for African slavery. Don't be naive. Even though it was prohibited by law to enslave indigenous people, they continued to be enslaved until literally like decades ago, okay? So illegally this happened because cheaper than buying a slave, it is going in the middle of the forest and kidnapping someone and making the person work for you for free, okay? So indigenous slavery never actually ended, but the African one was way more lucrative. So literally there were times that Portugal earned more with the slave trade than with the actual jobs that the slaves made themselves. And Brazil's economy was always, and keep in mind, always dependent of slavery. Brazil wouldn't have made so much wealth for other countries if there weren't a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean millions of black hands building it all without receiving a penny for it. So the estimative is that more than 4 million African people were brought to Brazil, and that Brazil received more than half of all the enslaved people that came to the whole America continent. So if we see, for example, in the United States, we see the impact that slavery had on them for centuries, etc. In Brazil, it was worse because Brazil was literally the country that received more enslaved people, and we were also the last country in the whole continent to abolish slavery. We had slavery from 1500 until 1888. It's less than 200 years since we ended slavery. And obviously, when you kidnap someone and send someone abroad, you don't give them a Portuguese course, you don't give them food, you don't give them conditions to live, you don't give them education. So it was a very, very brutal process. And the brutality starts in the transportation, because those people that were bought, traded, and gotten from Africa, they were brought to Brazil in ships that were called navio negreiro, and the travesty to cross the Atlantic Ocean took almost 3 months, and it's estimated that about 30% of the people didn't even survive the journey, because literally those people were kept handcuffed with their feet cuffed, and they were kept set for months without proper food, without clean water, without medication, without any kind of human rights. You have to understand that slavery was such a violent thing that literally changed nature. And I can tell you that because literally shark species that are not native from South America now live in our coast, because the sharks, yeah, baby shark, they figured out that a lot of bodies were always being thrown at the sea, and populations of sharks started following those ships and making the Atlantic route with the slave ships. And we see, for example, on the movie of the Black Panther, how strong it is when the character makes an homage that shows death over a life of suffering, because obviously a lot of people died and were thrown at the ocean, but also a lot of people chose to die. A lot of people took their own lives to don't live this, because guys, imagine living your whole life creating wealth for someone else to be treated like a thing, because legally in Brazil, slave people, black people were not people. By the law, they were objects that could be traded, sold, rented, raped, and everything else you can do with a single object. So this was very, very, very brutal, okay? And this is why we have many forms of resistance, because obviously these people did not accept this fate simply. So we had, for example, a lot of rebellions. We also have, to this day, communities that are called quilombolas, which are communities of people that ran away, of ex-enslaved people that ran away and sheltered with others. And those communities, quilombolas, sometimes they were so big and so important that they traded, they made business, they made diplomacy with the actual Brazilian government. So, for example, the biggest quilombo we had in Brazilian history in the northeast of Brazil, on its peak, they had 17,000 people living there in this community, having a full society built only with people that escaped slave labor. And this community, this quilombo, was so big and so important that it could not be ignored by the government. So they made a lot of trades, they made diplomacy, they made commerce with the communities nearby, with cities. The Brazilian government had to acknowledge its existence, and for decades decades, they put a big price on the great leader because they wanted to end this quilombo as a symbol of we are more powerful than you black people. So to this day here in Brazil we have a holiday in November, which is the Black Conscience, Black Awareness, I would say, Day. That is the day where Zumbi, the leader of this community, of this quilombo, was murdered, and his head was exposed in the city of Recife as a symbol of do not go against us or you will be just like him. But to this day, he is a hero for us. He's very important and a symbol of Brazilian resistance, of black resistance, and of African heritage, because these communities, these quilombos, they kept a lot of African languages, African traditions. A lot of people would be able to, inside the quilombos, keep their African roots, African traditions, African holidays, languages, but being in Brazil. So these communities are very important and they still exist to this day. If you come to Brazil, you can also visit one of them. And as I told you guys, our slavery was officially abolished in 1888, and don't be naive, it was abolished by the Brazilian crown, by the Emperor of Brazil, but it was not by his own goodwill, by his own wish that it happened. It was because not manageable anymore. We were having a lot of rebellions, we were having a lot of social movements, we were literally the last country on the whole continent to still have slavery. So it was not by the good heart, by the Christianity of our emperors that slavery ended, but because of social pressure and because it was not consistent anymore. And as I told you guys, even after slavery ended, we had literally millions of black people here in Brazil, and they couldn't go back to their countries. Many did, of course, but many people were here already for generations and generations. So to this day, Brazil has a very, very big and significant black culture and black origins, and we still speak a lot of African words without even knowing that they're African. If you go, for example, if you want to see it with your own eyes, I highly recommend you to go into the state of Bahia and to the city of Salvador, which the population is majority black. You will be able to eat a lot of African delicious food, and you will see also a lot of black culture. And one thing that also impacted all Brazil were the African religions, because even though African people were prohibited to have their own faith, their original faith, they were obliged to convert to Catholicism, they still kept their faith. And to this day, if you want to go to meet those religions, they have very beautiful rituals, ways of dressing, they're very open, it's very nice. So we still have a very big influence of those religions and black culture in Brazil. If you're interested on that, I would highly recommend you to go to Bahia and also to enjoy the sea view that is absolutely stunning there. They have, and the sea is warm. I miss going to Bahia. Okay, keep calm. I know I already spoke a lot, but we're kind of ending because now we're getting on the 19th century. We will speak a little bit about Napoleon. Yes, he will get in Brazilian history. He was important for us somehow. I don't know if you already heard of him, but this guy is Napoleon. He was a Frenchman, short but mighty, and he made a full empire on France. And I don't know if you ever checked the map, but Portugal and Spain are kind of neighbors. So Portugal was kind of terrified by the threat of Napoleon doing to him what he just did to Spain. And also Napoleon's biggest goal, he was kind of thirsting over England. He wanted to conquer England, but this was a little bit difficult because England was very powerful, first. And second, England is an island, and they were very good at naval wars. So Napoleon didn't have a lot of chance in a naval war. He was very good at physical wars. I don't know how to say, but he was very good at fighting men against men and not boat against boat. So Napoleon's plan was to make a lot of commercial difficulties to England. So he wanted everyone to stop commercializing with England. So England would become poor, and then England would become fragile, and then England would become weak, and then England would become his. See the strategy? If it seems familiar to you, it's because other countries still do it to this day. USA. And then Napoleon kind of hit the Portuguese and say, "Hello there. I see that you're friends with the English. Please don't, or I will invade you and destroy you." And Portugal couldn't and didn't want to do this because they were kind of dependent on English. And as you can imagine, England had a lot of influence on Portugal's economy and diplomacy. So the English ambassador in Portugal made a plan and convinced the Portugal royal family to do so. He was like, okay, let's not stop being friends with us, Englishmen, and let's not be invaded by Napoleon. What we will do is we will run away. Yeah. So they made a plan for the royal family to run away from Portugal to a place far away. A place so far away that Napoleon, that didn't want to go this tiny distance, wouldn't go. Because if Napoleon didn't want to do this, he definitely wouldn't do this. Yeah, so the English ambassador said, let's go, let's run away to Brazil. And the Portuguese were like, we don't have a choice, let's go. It turns out they were kind of right, because Napoleon actually invaded Portugal, but when it happened, there was no one there. No one, with no one, I mean no one important, because the peasants, yeah, they were there and they had a very rough time. So let's do a little DIY, a little tutorial. If you want to escape for somewhere else to don't be found, what you have to do? You have to be fast, otherwise you will be caught, and no one can know where you're going. So what happened was that literally the escape plan of Portugal lasted 2 days. 10 to 15 of the most important people of Portugal, that is very, very tiny, it's a very tiny country, the top 10 to 15,000 people escaped to Brazil in literally 2 days. Everyone, the royal family, the bankers, the entrepreneurs, the public workers, the administrators, everyone that was important, everyone that was wealthy, escaped Portugal in 2 days. Imagine being a Portugal peasant and literally in 2 days, your king goes away, your queen goes away, your princess, your bankers, Napoleon invades you, and you're there like, oh my God, what do I do? Yeah, very tough time. So the Portuguese population will soon have some struggle with their own government, but meanwhile, the royal family escaped to Brazil, and this will change Brazilian history forever, forever. Simply because in 1808, 10 to 15,000 important Portuguese people arrived in Brazil. And obviously, they were not renting Airbnbs and hotels in the city. No, they were building palaces. They were building gardens. They were building libraries. They were building universities. They were building a city for them to live. And the thing is that Brazil already had a city which is called Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro, as you may want. Rio de Janeiro was Brazil's capital at the time. And Rio de Janeiro already exists, already had a population, and literally in a couple of days, a lot of important people arrived there, and they were like, okay, please, peasants, go away because I need to build a palace in the center of the city. So what happened was that literally in a couple of days, thousands of poor people were expelled from their own houses, and they had nowhere to live because the Portuguese were building palaces where they used to live, and they got no compensation for that. And so they went to live on places where you can live for free, and those places are the hills, the mountains, places where you could live near the center of the city, because if you ever went to Rio de Janeiro has a lot of hills, and it's a very beautiful city. I highly recommend you go. And they went to live, the poor people went to live on these hills. And on these hills, there is a flower, a native flower that grows there, that is a white flower, very beautiful, which is called, the flower is called favela. So yeah, this is where it comes from. So a lot of people were expelled from their houses, and if you go to the center, to the historical center of Rio de Janeiro, now it's not in the best conditions, but it is a beautiful place to go. The historical center is all European style because it was built by the Portuguese. So we have palaces, public libraries. I highly recommend you to go to the reading cabinet. That is beautiful. It was one of the inspirations for the Hogwarts Library, and they built very beautiful places. And this was very important for Brazil because in the moment the royal family lives here, Brazil cannot be a colony anymore, because as a colony, Brazil could not commercialize with other countries. Brazil had not freedom. Brazil was literally, we were prohibited of having universities, of having our own journals and newspapers. We were prohibited of having schools. So literally, we were an uneducated people. Not because we're dumb, but because we were prohibited to think. We have registries, for example. We have a letter dated from the 18th century. It came from Minas Gerais because, as I told you guys, we had more than 3 million people living here in Minas Gerais. So they made a letter for the Portuguese government saying, hey, we have a lot of people here, a lot of people are dying on the mines. We want to build a medical school because we need doctors. People are getting sick and people are dying from the mine. The literal response that they got from the Portuguese government was, first, they want a medical school. Later, they will want independence. Because they knew the truth. An educated people will want freedom. A population that thinks is a population that will not accept slavery, that will not accept to be mistreated, that will not accept for its wealth to be taken away. So this is why we were always prohibited to have universities and everything. But in the moment that they came to live here, all of this ended. Brazil stopped being a colony of Portugal to be United Kingdom of Portugal and Algarve. So now Brazil was promoted in his colony career. Got it? Now Brazil has public universities, libraries, schools, newspapers. So this was very, very, very important. And do you agree with me that in the moment that you give them this freedom, you cannot take it away? Yeah, because a couple of years later, when Napoleon was defeated, the Portuguese royal family didn't have a reason to continue being here. But they liked Brazil. They liked living here, and they chose to continue living here. And this is when a rebellion ecloded in Portugal, where people were like, King, come back, don't abandon us. I know Brazil is beautiful, I know Brazil is better, but come back, please. And the king was like, oh my God, I don't want to. But as soon as Portuguese people rebelled, he had to go. And when the king went away, not only he took all the money from the Brazilian bank, the Brazilian National Bank, so he literally bankrupted the Brazilian bank because he literally took all the money that was in the Brazilian public bank and took it to Portugal. But he left here in Brazil his son, the Prince Pedro, which is Peter in Portuguese, okay? Prince Pedro, Peter, he was left here to manage the colony. He was left here as a manager. And Pedro, it's very important because Pedro will become our first emperor, okay? Pedro will do our independence here in Brazil. Pedro had a little bit of an identity crisis because he was Portuguese, but he felt Brazilian, he liked Brazil. So Portugal was rebelling. Portugal wanted Brazil to be back as a colony. Portugal wanted Brazil to lose all the privileges Brazil had won in the previous years, but Brazil obviously didn't want to go back to being a colony. So the Portuguese government was like, Pedro, we need you to come back. We need you to come back to Portugal, leave Brazil. And Pedro made a huge move because he literally said, no, I'm not going back. I'm staying in Brazil. And so he made, which we call the stay day, because it was the day that he announced for the population that he was going to stay. And from this day on, there is no coming back. Because not only he said, I am staying in Brazil, but he said, all the Portuguese military that is here had to swear loyalty to me. If Portugal sends military army here, it will be seen as a threat. I will go against these people. Brazil will not go back as a colony, and in a matter of fact, Brazil might be an independent country. So obviously a lot of diplomatic trouble went, but the Brazilian Declaration of Independence was signed, and important, it was signed by a woman because it was Pedro's wife, Leopoldina, that signed the independence of Brazil. And we had a war in Brazil from people that were trying to make Brazil be back as a colony and people that were fighting for Brazil independence. I have to highlight our hero that to this day is the patron of our army, the Brazilian army, that is Maria Quitéria. Maria was literally Brazil's Mulan because she was a woman from Bahia that she dressed as a man to fight for the independence of Brazil. And later, when she was found out to be a woman, she was the first woman to be allowed in the army, and she fought for our independence, and she was very important to us, and to this day she is a symbol for us of resistance and everything. So Brazil had a lot of conflict to guarantee its independence. Brazil had to pay for Portugal a couple of millions of pounds to be accepted as independent, and in the end, in 1822, Brazil became an independent country, and it became an empire over the rule of Pedro, which became Pedro I, Peter I, the Emperor of Brazil. But if you're liking Pedro so far, please don't, okay? Because he was not a very good administrator and he had a lot of tea in his personal life that affected his reign, especially because his wife, the girl that, as I told you guys, signed our Declaration of Independence, she was very loved by the population and he publicly cheated on her. Yeah, he had a mistress. They exchanged love letters where Pedro literally drew nudes of him. Yeah, he glued his pubes hair in the love letters he sent to her. I wish you could read Portuguese so you could read the letters that we have from them. It's very interesting. So yeah, he drew his own nudes to send to her, and it was everything very public. And she was no one liked her and no one liked him because the Empress was very much liked. And everything became worse when the Empress died pregnant. And the tea at the time, the gossip that went around at the time, that she did not die from disease, but from domestic violence that she suffered from the king. And so literally after the Empress died, the population in Rio de Janeiro got so revolted that they literally murdered the uncle of the mistress, and they were going to murder the mistress. And a diplomatic chaos was made. And in the meantime, in Portugal, Pedro's daughter, that was supposed to be the Queen of Portugal, got a coup, and someone took the power from her. That was actually her uncle. Let's not get into this. So it ended up that Pedro gave up on the Brazilian throne and went back to Portugal and left behind his son, that was also called Pedro. He became Pedro or Peter II. But at the time, he was only a baby, okay? He was 3 years old. And obviously, a child can't rule an empire. So what happened was that Brazil had a regency for a decade, and it did not work so well. So they emancipated Pedro when he was 14, and he became Pedro II, Peter II, the second and last emperor of Brazil. He was actually a good administrator. He was way better than his dad. To this day, a lot of Brazilians like him and respect him. But his rule ended in 1889 when a coup was made by the military that proclaimed a republic in Brazil. This happened because, long story short, the royal family in Brazil lost its support after they ended the slavery, because obviously the Brazilian elite was highly dependent on slavery for economic purposes. Literally 1 year later, the elite started supporting the military on a coup against the royal family. Also, the Catholic Church was having beef with Pedro for masonry and other trouble that I will not get into. And the military were also very pissed with the royal family because Brazil went through a very violent war that is called a Guerra do Paraguay, the War of Paraguay, where it was literally Paraguay against Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. And it was literally the most violent war in the history of South America, and the most violent war that happened in the whole world between the succession war in the USA and the First World War. So it was literally only in Paraguay, that is also a very small country, more than 100,000 people died. So the military were having beef with the royal family. So in the end, a coup was made, and we started being a republic in 1889. And the first years of the republic were also a little bit complicated, because as the republic was proclaimed by military, the military were the first presidents that Brazil had, and they tried to make other coups. Yeah, it was a little bit problematic. Brazil had a lot of coups, military trying to take power. We had a couple of dictatorships as well. So let's get into this. So our first years of republic were marked by this corruption on the elections, literally elections where there were a single nominee for president, so people wouldn't even have a choice on their government. So this was very complicated, and it ended with another coup made by the military, but headed by a guy named Getúlio Vargas. And now we will have a dictatorship, because Getúlio Vargas, he was not a military, but he was aligned with the military. Getúlio Vargas was for sure the most important, most commented, and most controversial politician Brazil has ever had. The guy died literally like 70 years ago, and it is still discussed between us if we like him or not, because he's a very controversial figure in the sense that he got in the power by a coup. He made a couple of other coups to continue in power. He was in power for 15 years, from 1930 to 1945, but he ruled Brazil for 15 years, and he had leftist moves, but also was very aligned with the right wings. So he made a lot of compliments to Hitler, to Mussolini. He went after, killed, and prosecuted a lot of communists and leftists in Brazil, but at the same time, he was the guy that made workers' rights, and his name is literally on our workers' documents to this day. He's very, very important. He made public education, public health, so he made a lot of things that benefit poor people, and poor people were the majority of Brazil. So he made good things and bad things. This is why we cannot put him as a hero or a villain. He made good things and very questionable things, and his dictatorship ended literally because of the hypocrisy, which was when the World War II happened. Brazil went to the war aligned with the USA. We had a lot of soldiers that went to Italy and fought against the fascists, against the Nazis, and meanwhile, Brazil was being ruled by a guy that complimented Hitler and Mussolini. So his government was not being able to stand after so many years. So he was taken out by a coup, and Brazil had a brief moment of democracy between 1945 and 1964. It was in this period of time, for example, that our current capital, because Brazil's capital is not Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo, Brazil's capital is Brasília, okay? And it was on this moment that Brasília, our capital, was built, and Brasília was also important because Brazil is a very big country, and Brasília is more in the middle, so it brought population to go to places where there were not very highly populated, so this was very important. And Brazil had a moment of democracy. We had 5 presidents in this moment, one of them being Getúlio Vargas, that made a comeback and then suicided and then created a political chaos in Brazil. He wrote a letter of suicide that was so emotional that made people put the journals that were against Getúlio Vargas on fire. Yeah, literally, people put fire on buildings because of the letter he wrote. If you want to see the pajamas that he was wearing when he died, with a blood stain and everything, you can go to Palácio do Catete in Rio de Janeiro, which is the place where the presidents used to live before Brasília was constructed, and you will see the gun that he used, the pajama he was wearing, the room as it was left by him. It is a very interesting visiting that you should do if you pass by Rio de Janeiro, so I would highly recommend. Yeah, so our moment of democracy ended with a coup, another coup. Yes, we like to make big changes with violence. So in 1964, the military again made another coup in Brazil and installed a military dictatorship that lasted for more than 20 years. It's very important for you to know that this dictatorship was founded, was supported, and literally the military were trained by the USA, okay? United States was very much responsible for this, and not only with us, okay? Similar dictatorships happened in all Latin America, okay? We're talking about Argentina, Chile, Nicaragua, Uruguay. Basically, every Latin America country already had a dictatorship founded by the USA. And when I say founded, it's not only that they gave money for the dictators to continue in power, but they literally took the military men, the policemen, the army guys to military bases in the US, in Panama, to train them to how to torture people. It was a very dark and difficult time, because for more than 20 years, we had only military presidents. They killed a lot of people that were never found, whose bodies were never found, and whole families family set apart. Children were also frequently tortured in front of their parents in order to make them speak, to make them rat their colleagues, their friends, etc. A lot of people had to run away from Brazil, and this happened in a lot of countries because Argentina also had a dictatorship founded by the USA. Chile also had a dictatorship founded by USA. Uruguay also had. So a lot of people were escaping. For example, I live by the border, I can escape to Uruguay. Oops, Uruguay is also having a dictatorship. Now I have to go to Argentina. Oops, Argentina is also pretty much fucked. Oh my god, now let's go to Chile. Oh my god, the Chilean dictatorship killed even more people than the Brazilian one. So it was a very tough time for us here in South America. The 60s, 70s, and a little bit of the 80s where those dictatorships happened, okay? If you want to know more about it, I highly recommend you to watch a movie, a Brazilian movie that was Oscar nominated, that is called Ainda Estou Aqui, which means I'm still here. That is the story of a Brazilian politician that was tortured and killed by the dictatorship. It's the story about his family, especially his wife, that spent years and years fighting for the right to know what happened to her husband. And if you want to learn more about those dictatorships, I have a lot of movie recommendations that will appear on the screen about the Argentinian dictatorship that was also one of the most violent in Argentina. The militaries used to literally drug people to sleep, put them on airplanes, alive on airplanes, put stones and weights on their feet and throw them from airplanes to the sea, and they would die drowned. And yeah, it was a very dark time in our history. And after our dictatorship ended in 1985, Brazil went back to democracy, and it's this democracy that we're living to this day. So we had presidents ever since, and we made a new constitution in 1988 that is the current Brazilian constitution, that is literally internationally acknowledged as one of the biggest and most complete constitutional texts in all the world, because as we were coming out from a very difficult time, our constitution is very clear about native indigenous rights, women's violence, children's rights, freedom of speech, and a lot of things. So our constitution is internationally acknowledged for being one of the constitutions that protects most its population, because we don't want it to happen again. And currently Brazilian is living a democracy. We have presidents that are elected and everything. We have some tea, because Brazil, as many countries around the world, is now very much divided between left wings and right wings. It's a complicated scenario, but at least I have the freedom to speak about it to you guys. And this is pretty much it. Because this video is huge. I already warned you that you would not be bored for a single moment, and I hope that you felt this way. I hope that after this video you get more interested on coming to Brazil, on seeing our people, on speaking Portuguese, on riding Brazil with an S, okay? I hope that you like my work. If you want to continue keeping up with my work, you can follow me on my social media. You can watch my videos with the subtitles. As I told, this video was made especially for foreign people to understand a little bit more about us, about our origins. Only we Brazilians can speak badly about our country, okay? But Brazil has a lot of problems, of course, but it's also a country that is very beautiful, and our people, we are very welcoming, and we get very happy when people want to hear from us about ourselves. So we get very happy and very honored when visitors want to see with their own eyes instead of watching foreign media, instead of believing everything they say. Of course, Brazil has a lot of difficulties and a lot of trouble, but it's not as portrayed in media. It's not all jungle, it's not all violence, it's not all poverty. It's not. Brazil, it's many things. And please comment here, where are you from? Where are you watching this video from? Because I'm very curious about it, and I hope that you learned a little bit more. I hope you can impress your Brazilian friends with all the knowledge that now you have. And if you got to the end of this video, please leave a comment written you took your time, so I can know you got to the end of this video, okay? If you comment this, I will know that you got to the very end. Thank you very much. If you want to support my job, subscribe to my social media. If you want to buy my Brazilian history course, it is very good. It is in Portuguese, but it is very good if you want to support my job financially. I highly recommend. It's in my website, deboraladin.com.br. The link is in the description. And thank you very much for listening to me and for opening up for a different culture. E para escravos brasileiros assistindo esse vídeo, muito obrigada. I hope I didn't offend anyone with my thick accent, but thank you for your attention and I see you in the next video. Um beijo!